Hey, I'm Jane Lafazio, and I'm going to show you how I watercolor. So my friend Barbara made this little pin out of zippers. So I've already drawn it on my watercolor paper with pencil, and then I inked over with a permanent ink pen. And now I'm going to erase the pencil. So I have a lovely little ink drawing. Usually when I draw in my journal, I try to do it in maybe 45 minutes. I did take longer on this one. I took about an hour and a half, just because it was a fun thing. So I've got my watercolors over here. This is a water brush, and the water is held in the receptacle. So I'm going to mix up a kind of turquoise color. And I never like using the color just straight from the palette. I like to mix my own and change it. The other thing I like to do is leave a little bit of white as I'm painting. So you can see I'm just kind of dabbing it on, and these brushes actually hold a fair amount of water. And I'm just going to keep looking back to make sure I'm, oh, gotta go that way, okay. Make sure I'm painting the right color, or the right part turquoise and the right part brown. And the watercolor dries pretty fast. So really it's the drawing that takes the longest, and the painting goes quickly. And notice how I'm going in and changing up the color ever so slightly. I don't like to just mix one shade of color and then just paint it like you would a room all in the same shade. I like variation as I go along. So that's why I keep dipping back in. These ink lines help separate the parts of the drawing so that I don't have to depend on my values of watercolor to do that. Because the whole idea of this kind of watercolor in a journal page is to do it quickly. To be able to do it while you're traveling, or one of my favorite things is like to go to the farmer's market and come home with flowers or produce and sit down at the kitchen table and draw it and paint it. So I'm going to fill in, and see, look at that, I even changed the blue a little bit there, but I like it. If I wanted a photo of this pin made of zippers, I would take a photo. So I'm going in, and when I dab my brush on that cloth, that gets rid of the excess water, so that the thing about watercolor is you have to learn the ratio, just by practice, of pigment to water, and then you don't want your brush dripping wet. So it's just a practice thing, but when you're painting watercolor, always have a paper towel or a rag or something. Notice how I'm looking back and forth at this, because it is kind of a complicated little thing, and I want to make sure I get the right colors in the right spot. I think this is turquoise. I drew this earlier, and I probably turned it when I set it down again. Oh well. Okay, I think that's all the blue. So now I'm going to mix up a little bit of the brown. And I do the same kind of thing. This is the only part, when I'm working on the palette, is the only time I actually squeeze any water out of this little brush. And I'm getting a little puddle of brown, so I have it to work with. And a little gold. I said I want to make the color my own, change it up a little bit. Let's darken it. To darken colors, we watercolor artists are very snobby. We don't, oh, there's a turquoise I missed, no problem. We never use black. We always mix our own dark. So an example would be when I want to darken up this brown, I added blue rather than black. So around like this. Notice how the white keeps it sort of fresh, I think. And the brown here. That's blue. Do not paint it brown. Brown here. When I drew this, as I mentioned briefly, I did it in pencil first. For me, that takes a lot of the stress out of it. I know that if you were to draw it in pen first, you'd eventually probably become a better artist, but it's so nerve-wracking. To me anyway, my shoulders are like up around my neck. So I like to do it in pencil first and then go over those lines. I'm missing something right here in my drawing. Then go over those lines with ink after I'm sure I've got the drawing, usually, you know, as good as I can within the time allowed. Add that little turquoise I missed. So now I'm going to, so it's starting to dry already. Now I'm going to mix up some gray. And I mix up gray by adding blue, mixing a blue and brown. And you really can get anywhere from light gray to blue gray to brown gray. It makes a really nice gray. So the tines, is that what they call them on a zipper? Anyway, the little silver parts are silver, so I'm going to use gray. And I really don't want to overpaint those because frankly, I spent a lot of time inking them. So I'm just going to, as you can see, just sort of dab on the gray to give that indication. And I don't, even though when I draw, I try to be as realistic as possible. When I paint, I like to exaggerate the colors and be looser. I don't ever want it to look like I'm trying to keep within the lines. I want it to look like a fresh journal page, like you know, something in my journal, not something I'm going to hang over the fireplace. All right, I think that's it. Now probably what I do is I let this dry, and then I'd go back in, and I won't do it for you now, but I'll just kind of give you the idea. I'd look at it now, and I'd look for the darker areas. I sort of painted them all the same value. Once it's dry, I can go back in with, say, a dark blue, and the areas that are in shadow, lightly shade them. So it starts to give this whole thing, let's see, another dark spot right in here, starts to give it some dimension. And here, I took out all the color of my brush, I wiped it clean, and I'm feathering that edge. I want to show you that again. That's important, and that's hard to describe unless you see it. So a dark area on here would be right over here. So I'm putting in the dark blue, and then very quickly, I'm going over here, getting the color out of my brush, got a clear, just clear water, and while it's still wet, I can just blend it. Thanks, I hope you learned something, and I hope that you'll take up watercolors. It's really fun.